So I'll try to give a sort of a high-level overview of what we believe the market, where the market is right now and where it's heading. A few things about myself. I'm a geek by training. This is my 5th company that I've started with sort of varying levels of success. A couple of them went under. Sold one for 100+ million. I had a couple of IPOs, one in London, one in NASDAQ. So what I really want to talk about, I want to sort of just give you a high-level overview about the market. All of us are sort of immersed into this sort of day-to-day, and it's sort of sometimes, it's not often that we take a step back and look where the market is today and where it's heading. So the market I'm talking about is that of in-app purchases. The market was worth less than $1 billion 10 years ago. It was practically non-existent. If you look at the market today, it's worth 90-odd billion, and it's going to grow to 140 billion in the next sort of 4 years. And that's a very significant growth. What's even more interesting is that if you look at the market in terms of a gross profit, it's 100 billion plus. Why is that interesting? That's a huge freaking number. I mean, we seldom sit back and look at the sort of, at the interesting sort of, at this number. It's $100 billion of people buying magic swords and sort of random stuff within apps. Yet, even though that market looks sort of insane, and it's a serious number, in my mind, the market is going to grow quite faster over the next following years. So it's an exponential curve. I mean, humans, we're really bad at, we usually underestimate how long something's going to take, an exponential curve, but we also underestimate how big it's going to be. So the next generation of stuff that's coming on, like sort of all of the new AR stuff, it's really going to monetize through the 2 stores plus Facebook plus Amazon. And that's really going to be through in-app purchases. So trying to optimize in-app purchases and increasing and managing consumers through that is sort of critical. And if you look at the size of the market, if you take out the stores percentage, at 100 billion plus in terms of gross profit, that's larger than the automotive industry. So I mean, the industry we're all in with really minimal capital investments, right? It's larger in terms of gross profit than the automotive industry. It's sort of mind-blowing. Now, let's talk a bit about the multinationals, right, and what the talk is about. So this is really about looking at acquiring new consumers versus leveraging existing customers, and what is the right balance between the two. So if you look at global advertising agencies like the WPPs of this world, the IPGs, the Omnicoms, if you look at how their customers, the multinationals, spend their budgets, 1/3 is for the above-the-line stuff, advertising, usually associated with acquisition, and 2/3 is marketing, below-the-line stuff that's usually associated with how do you essentially cultivate, leverage, milk, however you want to call it, existing customers. It's also sort of a very well-known secret that it's much cheaper to essentially make money out of an existing customer, make more money out of an existing customer, make a larger gross profit out of an existing customer, as opposed to go out there and keep trying to acquire new customers. So it's really critical to convert more non-payers into payers and then continue to build the existing customers. And then the final thing is that there's really a way to do that outside the core product. What I mean outside the core product is, I mean, it's very easy to say, hey, I'm going to build an even better app, an even better game, and yes, obviously, if it's better, obviously it's going to monetize better. But revenue optimization and milking existing customers, leveraging existing customer, has to do with doing all of that above and beyond the actual app. So what are the other things you could be doing outside making the best app out there in order to monetize best? Because that's critical. Every other industry is doing it. I mean, it's like saying, hey, I'm just going to be building out a larger dragon so I can sell you a larger sword, and doing nothing outside that. It's like being Vodafone and saying, hey, as long as you have sort of, at least 3 bars here, which is my core product, hey, my cell phone towers work, I'm not going to do anything else. There's no advertising, there's no loyalty, there's no marketing. And obviously, large companies do all this other stuff because they can make more money. Now, obviously, why aren't people sort of doing that, and why is so much of the spending right now focusing on the acquisition side as opposed to sort of everything else on the marketing side? The answer is simple. It's a freaking hard problem, and it's a non-scalable problem to date, meaning that it's very easy to go out there and spend a lot of money, let's say, to acquire stuff, spend money on CPI, on Facebook, and acquire new consumers. It's much less scalable to try to do the same thing for your own sort of customers throughout the app. the existing, let's say, industry doesn't really sort of, or tools from the existing industries don't really help us sort of in this industry. Why? Because for the first time in history, we have 50 people companies trying to manage 50 million consumers. The tools that exist in traditional industries, who had 50 million consumers 10 years ago? The large telcos, the Verizons of this world and the Vodafones of this world, the car manufacturers. The tools that exist for them in terms of managing their consumers, revenue optimizing, and running CRM systems don't apply in our industry. Why? Because somebody like a Vodafone is going to have hundreds of people managing their existing customers. It's not the tools that Vodafone is using. Hey, I'm going to build a dozen, let's call it, sort of personas of consumers, the young millennial, the likely to churn. Then I'm going to run another dozen of workflows on top of this consumer, create my metrics, go and run different. It's like nobody has time for this. I mean, this requires serious sort of headcount. So it's a hard problem to solve. And above and beyond that, there's not a lot of expertise in the industry because it's a young industry, it's a nascent industry. We feel we're sort of, cooler than these sort of industries out there. Let's call it the processes don't exist, the systems don't exist that allow us sort of do that. And do that, I mean having a closed loop system using machine learning that automatically decides what is the optimal price for its consumer and how to retain consumers sort of longer. Plus, building on the plumbing. Because if I give you, let's say, amazing reports and amazing infographics and amazing sort of analytics, if I don't close the loop, that's freaking useless. Yes, you can show to the board and say, hey, look at how cool this looks. But unless you close the loop, unless you come up with next best action sort of automatically, that doesn't really affect your bottom line. And this is sort of what we believe is a big hole in terms of technology, in terms of software, and this is something that we're trying to address. Now, let's talk a bit about sort of what we feel is the future and, well, part of the future, I hope, because this thing doesn't really lead anywhere. We sort of need to change that. But it's one of the companies that go under, right? So anyways, so what we feel people should be focusing on, right? We do two things. One is, how on earth do you retain consumers longer by managing and deploying a retention program, an automated loyalty and retention program? So in traditional industries, sort of previous lives, one of the companies I'm sort of chairing the board of, we're still running Vodafone's global loyalty programs, T-Mobile's global loyalty programs. It's tedious and it's freaking hard. But even on a let's call it industry that's pretty much saturated, we're still increasing retention by 20-25%. We're increasing sort of ARPU for these guys for 30% plus because you tend to retain the consumers that are paying more. So that's one. Make sure that consumers that come to the app stay or the game stay longer. And the second is, okay, how on earth do we make more money? How do we convert more players into payers? How do we make sure we extend the lifetime value? How do we come up with the next best action, right, in terms of how do we maximize the net present value of the lifetime value of the consumer? Instead of just doing sort of shameless plugs for our technology, I'm going to show you sort of some results in terms of case studies, and hopefully it's going to be a bit more interesting. If you are bored, just start looking at your cell phones, and I'm going to accelerate. Okay. Okay. So the first thing that we do is, in terms of dynamic pricing, the first thing that we do is regional pricing. Okay, what is regional pricing? Obviously, when you're selling something for 99 cents in sort of New York City and you try to sell the same thing for 99 cents in a random country across the world, the equivalent local currency, that's not going to sell that well. And obviously, there are a lot of folks out there that sort of focus on the top 5 markets and sort of optimize their price for the top 5 markets, but there's a big world out there. So what I show here, give you an example. This is country 4, right? What country 4 says is that, look, you should be selling at 16 cents to the dollar. So if you're charging for something 99 cents in New York, there you should be charging 16 cents. But you're going to be selling 15 times, 17 times the number of units. So your revenue is going to go up at least 170%. It's sort of basic macroeconomics. So we have predictive analytic econometric models that go and discover the supply and demand curves, the price elasticities of each in-app purchase of each game across the world. And not only that, we automatically go and we upload it sort of to the stores on your behalf. So we're not just sort of giving you analytics, hey, this is a great price. How do we do this? this is not just a sort of PPP, purchasing pricing sort of adjusted type of approach. I mean, we're calculating really the propensity of each consumer to buy based on sort of demographics, specific data that we have, type of game, genre, etc. So that's number one, sort of readjusting, and that's a tip, right? Egypt, 16 cents to the dollar, believe it or not. Try it out tomorrow. That one is free on us. So, no, seriously, it makes a huge difference. Because look, a lot of people have their heart in the right place, and they say, okay, Egypt is a poor country, maybe we should be charging sort of 80 cents, 70 cents. No, guys. I mean, it's shocking how deep the discounts have to be at certain countries, and sometimes how much you're undercharging other countries. I mean, it's shocking. We're looking at countries. Take a look at this one. It's sort of fascinating. You're both increasing the price by 47% of the item, and you're selling more units. This is a hugely price inelastic country, right? Because the golden-plated Lamborghini there that you pay $5 million for is so much better than the $500,000 regular Lamborghini. It's more expensive. People perceive it as more valuable, and they buy more stuff at a more expensive price, at a higher price. So that's one. That's not dynamic pricing yet, right? Here you readjust the whole country. So everybody in the different countries sees sort of different price. The second sort of area is going and doing dynamic pricing on a per consumer basis. So in general, because the marginal cost is very close to zero, you can price wherever you want, provided, number one, that you don't create a sense of unfairness in the mind of the consumers. That's very important. Number two, you don't screw your in-game economics. I mean, these are sort of two very, very important hard constraints, and I cannot sort of overemphasize how important they are. But in general, I mean, with technology that says, okay, you're a consumer in Egypt, instead of spending $5 for the bundle, which is 88 Egyptian pounds, which is a lot of money, everybody in Egypt is going to be spending 80 cents, and that specific consumers, they're going to see a 25% additional discount. Why is that? Because our predictive analytics show us that this is going to maximize the probability of converting that consumer from a non-payer into a payer. Does that make sense? I mean, where do you discount in general? You discount early at the life cycle to convert non-payers into payers. You discount towards the end of the life cycle, so you can milk consumers a bit longer when they start seeing discounts for stuff that they used to be much more expensive. It creates a sense of value. And then the final thing that we do is bundling. So we figure out what are the negatively correlated goods, and we bundle them together. I mean, this is bundling theory. So for instance, magic shoes, magic shield, and magic sword, my propensity of me and people like me to buy all three together is 1.2 out of 3. Consumer is going to see sort of an offer saying, hey, next 8 hours it's 50% off. Huge value in their head, 25% upsell for the publishers that use our technology. Again, we try to find negatively correlated goods. It's quite effective. I mean, the way it works, it's you log in using your App Store or Google Play credentials. Our platform goes in and sucks in all of the in-app purchases of your game. It shows the different prices in the different countries. You see the in-app purchases here. These are the initial prices. These are the sort of suggested prices. You can fine-tune this in any way you want. In reality, most people put it in autopilot. Initially, they maximize the free-to-bill ratio. After launch, they maximize the number of payers, and then they turn it on autopilot and maximize revenue. And our platform goes automatically and changes that. Obviously, it's a non-trivial problem, right? Sort of, let's call it typical game, sort of 20 in-app purchases. Let's call it 500 combinations of bundles times 50 countries times a couple of stores. Suddenly, you need to have a couple of management system that manages, tens of thousands of items. So you cannot do dynamic pricing if you don't have the underlying technology. If you have to manually go and upload sort of CSV files to the store. And we sort of do all that. Some examples, take a look at Russia. Sort of tripling the free-to-bill ratio, increasing the number of transactions, ARPDAU more than doubled. Brazil is an interesting one. Because you're seeing a sort of a higher uplift on the transaction than on the ARPDAU. But one of my favorite ones is also sort of Italy, because Italy is a Eurozone country, right? It's an OECD country. You wouldn't expect things to be sort of so mispriced. It should be closer to the civilized world. And I'm Greek, so I can make that joke. You guys can't, or most of you can't. So So Italy, ARPDAU increased by 66%. So that's number one, pricing, and I'm running out of time, so let me accelerate. The second thing that we do, in addition to pricing, is loyalty. So loyalty and retention. So on a high level, if you look at loyalty and retention, right, what are we trying to achieve? Consumers take certain actions. Our platform processes all your events from within the game, constructs lifetime journeys for the typical player. Hey, day 5, they just killed the dragon, and day 20, they saved the princess. Then the same thing for the payers versus the non-payers, then the same thing for whales. And then tries to figure out what are the events that are make consumers more likely to actually go from sort of a lower spending state to a higher spending state. And we reward with virtual points these events more. So on a typical loyalty program, you give out points to consumers, and you give more points to drive them to behaviors that you want them to, to drive them to. So what we're trying to do here is, on one hand, reward consumers and slightly change their behavior, and on the other hand, do that in a way that, well, is not sort of is beneficial to the whole consumer experience. So the way it works very quickly is, you integrate our SDK, and yes, you have an SDK, and yes, you have to integrate it, and life is tough, guys. You want to make more money, you have to do a bit of engineering work. So you can click on the icon. So what our loyalty looks like is there's a visual overlay that comes out, and we render all of this. You can render yourself through our API, but it's a lot of work. You see here the loyalty card of the typical consumer, right? That many points, they're silver, that many points to gold. You get 10 points for a new high score, you get 500 points for completing the tutorial. Why? Because consumers that complete tutorials are more likely to make a purchase. Everything else that you see here is what we call tactics. So on the typical loyalty program, you have an acquisition of points, but then you need to have tactics. I mean, we're not just giving you a sort of, how do I put it, a blank sheet of paper, a clean slate to actually do stuff on. Because doing loyalty is hard. I mean, we've been doing this in other industries for more than a dozen years. If you look at our platform, it's more than 1 million lines of code. I mean, there's a lot of data here. There's a lot of stuff. So what we give you is we give you more than 30 pre-configured tactics that we know work. And if you have a casual game, let's say, use these 15 tactics. If you have a multiplayer game, use these sort of 22. You can use all of them, but frankly, the consumer can only see at any given time some of them, right? So you have a tactic, you want to improve, let's say, gameplay progression. You have a tactic that looks like a quest. What's a quest? A lot of consumers are dropping at level 9. You're going to have something, they win something at level 10. Believe it or not, that increases by 12% plus the number of consumers that stick around. And again, there are a lot of little things that if you run them sort of together, essentially drive a very compelling consumer experience. And again, you can think of this as a sort of as a visual overlay into your app, a way to add and drive consumers to different behaviors that you want, which is make them stick around longer and make them essentially spend more money. Obviously you can configure everything, and let me give you some sort of results that are quite interesting. So these are some of the tactics. So what I'm showing you here, we're not cherry picking, it's all of our database, sort of millions of consumers, 22 countries that we're running on right now. Day 1 retention from 32% to 46%, up 43%. Look at the session play per time, from 7 minutes to 10 minutes, free to build conversion. And again, the ARPPU, I mean, look, it grows a lot, right? I mean, if you look at our pilots right now, we're more than doubling people's revenue. If you're doing no optimization in your revenue, I mean, that's not surprising. I'm old enough to remember that click-through rates on the web used to be 5%. They're not there anymore. But we believe that you can really, I gave you the example of the large telcos, you can really improve your retention and improve your ARPU materially, sort of 20, 30, 40%. By running a focused sort of loyalty program. And again, there are a lot of tactics that you might be doing already. What you have here is a multivariate testing system that sits on top of machine learning that allows you to sort of run a lot of different tactics for a lot of segments of your consumer base at the same time and see what works and see what clicks. And that concludes my opening statement. Any questions, guys? Please.
General question, because you're looking at so much data and so many games at a time, do you see overarching trend?
Should we go sit down together?
Do you want to try that so we can all hear
Okay.
you again?
Do you see an overarching trend that today's audiences are reacting differently to your frameworks, tactics, and methodologies than, let's say, 2 years ago? The background of my question is like, I got the bad feeling that there's a certain reluctance towards payment of what form, in any form, like if they're incremental payments and not subscriptions.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair question, right? So, I mean, the quick answer is, I'm good at spotting trends. I'm not that good at spotting the correct trends. And I think that's true for every single one of us, because I mean, we're looking at billions of rows of data, and we're looking at hundreds of columns. I mean, it's really hard to make sense of something, especially sort of long-term sort of evolution, right? I totally understand what you're saying. My one comment here is what we're seeing is that we're seeing that the amount of money consumers spend for the time of entertainment they're getting is still quite a small part of their wallet. I mean, you talk to some people, it's really hard to find a place where you can spend sort of 99 cents and have an hour's worth of entertainment. It's really hard to do that in any sort of other industry, right? Not just sort of in the OECD countries, but let's say in the G25, right, or in the next 20. So, totally understand what you say. There is a trend there that works for certain types of apps, for certain types of games, but in general, we're looking at sort of monetization as something much more sort of, I would say, overarching. But in my mind, it's all about sort of the right offer, the right consumer at the right point in time. That's why you see me struggling trying to make a generalization.
I'm going to bring the mic over again. I think this is probably going to be our final question because of the catching up time.
Yeah. Hi, thanks. My name's Jessica. I'm a data scientist at King, and I think this is a very interesting topic with dynamic pricing. And one thing that you mentioned already was this, that you had to be careful about the sense of unfairness between players. And if you also keep in the back of your mind another theme that I've heard throughout the day, which is the sense of community and players connecting with each other through digital channels.
Right.
How do you marry those two, and how do you keep in mind the ethical and maybe even legal issues that you might encounter?
So legal issues are legal issues, and we leave this to the lawyers, right? I mean, on a high level, you have to know, it's important, right? I mean, there are places where you cannot do price discrimination. It's sort of as simple as that. What you can do, though, is offer specific discounts or to everybody the same discount if they hit a certain trigger, right? Good news is that we're all processing enough data here that you can find unique characteristics for each consumer that can warrant a specific offer just to that consumer, right? They were scratching the right ear as they were. You can become specific. That said, that doesn't solve sort of the other sort of issue, the other problem, or the other sort of opportunity, which is how do you not create a sense of unfairness, especially to games that have a sort of a strong community. That's where you go and you do a lot of your work, and in what we call sort of bundling, right? Where you're seeing, and I'm trying to see if I have a slide here, and of course I don't. You create bundles. And you create these bundles, and you give sort of really sort of good discounts to consumers. That creates value in their head, but these are things they wouldn't normally buy together, so your revenue still goes up. But I mean, you guys essentially invented how you milk consumers longer, right? And sometimes in an annoying way. I have uninstalled myself one or two of your games when I was very annoyed. But yes, I mean, it's an important thing. That's why we feel everything should be done in the context of a loyalty program, because consumers stick around in a loyalty program because they want to. You're not forcing them, you're not tricking them. They get points, they win brownie points, they can redeem those points with sort of something, and at the end, hopefully everybody's happy. And the interesting thing is, because you're rewarding the behaviors you want to reward, you tend to retain the more valuable consumers, if that makes sense. So even though you might increase retention by 20%, you're going to increase ARPU by 25 or 30.